The United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992 was a landmark event which spawned three important international environmental treaties. These were the Climate Change Convention, the Convention on Desertification, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD. If we look at the actual impact of the CBD, it has a mixed performance. It has certainly galvanized interest around protected areas management and also been successful in promulgating a protocol on biosafety. However, extinction rates continue to rise globally, and we don't have a clear consensus on how to incorporate ecosystem services or natural capital valuation metrics that would tangibly reduce biodiversity loss. To provide a better science interface for the CBD and other treaties that deal with biodiversity, a special platform was developed in 2013 known as the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES. The IPBES was designed to learn from some of the pitfalls that its sister science panel for climate change, the IPCC, had encountered. The criticism of the IPCC as being detached from the political realm and often talking at diplomats rather than conversing with them on tough decisions has been taken to heart by the designers of the IPBES. Robert Watson, the first chair of the IPCC, was closely involved in the development of IPBES. Attention to nomenclature, such as the choice of terms of platform rather than panel, was given to allow for more adaptability within the organization. Unlike climate change, biodiversity is less prominent in public discourse. However, it can be just as polarizing among political constituencies, where the value of animals and plants can get dismissively compared to human suffering due to poverty by economically expedient political forces. Thus, IPBES was conceived as a dialogue between diverse knowledge systems and will still strive to also incorporate subjective areas of inquiry, such as traditional ecological knowledge, which may be more difficult to test through modern scientific processes. IPBES has the advantage of having a very detailed international scientific repertoire process preceding its establishment in the form of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, in which its chair also played a prominent role. After the completion of the Millennium Assessment in 2006, France convened a process for harnessing scientific expertise on biodiversity, which led to a report that recommended the establishment of IPBES. The four key mandate areas of IPBES were clearly delineated by the UN Environment Programme, who would host its secretariat, but noting its coverage of all multilateral environmental agreements relevant to biodiversity as follows. First, to identify and prioritize key scientific information needed for policymakers and to catalyze efforts to generate new knowledge. Secondly, to perform regular and timely assessments of knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystem services and their interlinkages. Third, to support policy formulation and implementation by identifying policy-relevant tools and methodologies. And finally, to prioritize key capacity-building needs to improve the science policy interface and to provide and call for financial and other support for the highest priority needs related directly to its activities. Even though peacebuilding has been a primordial stated goal of the United Nations system and is certainly one of the Sustainable Development Goals, environmental treaties under its auspices have stayed clear of attempts to link agreements to conflict resolution. The CBD is a notable exception insofar that the programs of work in several areas of the Convention mention transboundary cooperation and peacebuilding. However, these themes are often relegated to platitudes with little action because of a paradoxical fear that peacebuilding will politicize and hinder progress on the agreements. It is high time that negotiators overcome this visceral reluctance to link ecology and peacebuilding. Ecological regions defy political delineations, and thus any efforts to impose physical boundaries in such areas invariably has an impact on natural processes. Consider the impact of border fencing, which has been such a major topic of discussion during the US 2016 presidential election. Patrolling along the US-Mexico border is expected to affect 60 to 70% of wildlife refuges along the Rio Grande Valley. There is no organized mechanism that lays out clear guidelines and protocols on codes of behavior in such areas within international law. In particular, since border areas are often militarized, there is very little control that can be exercised by environmental managers without the mandate from the security forces. It is important to note that the Conference of the Parties to the CBD has acknowledged the importance of transboundary conservation at two levels. First, through the Protected Areas Initiatives and the Ecosystem Approach Initiative, and secondly, through the Protected Areas Program of Work. Unfortunately, there has been no evaluation carried out by the CBD Secretariat about the implementation of these efforts by the parties in any tangible way. Some of the areas where the CBD can play an important instrumental role in fostering international cooperation include: first, identifying vulnerable transboundary conservation areas and providing them with international legal protection in terms of potential ecological damage during conflict. Second, providing a mechanism for joint environmental and security management regimes that have international support through the CBD Secretariat and can be a conduit for the donor support specifically targeted in this context. Third, enabling a monitoring system for environmental indicators in these border regions that would have the support of signatories on a continuing international basis and not just dependent on a particular national regime. Fourth, providing border communities access to natural resources in order to facilitate sustainable livelihoods and cross-border social cooperation and engagement. Furthermore, the CBD should recognize the unique role it can play in urging parties to consider how environmental factors can build peace in conflict zones. This can be done by prioritizing project implementation in areas where there has been historic conflict for conservation activities and perhaps even developing a protocol on transboundary conservation within the CBD. In summary, biodiversity has much potential for being a major rallying cry for international cooperation. Extinction of a species is perhaps the most irrevocable change that can occur in the biotic system of our planet. Finding ways to manage the enchanting diversity of living beings that share this world must be a challenge that development leaders embrace. To quote the great Dutch nature photographer Frans Lanting, "Biodiversity starts in the distant past, and it points towards the future."